Hi. Today, I'd like to talk to you about pseudoscience, pseudoarchaeology, crystal skulls, and other kinds of myths. One of the first of these that I think is appropriate to discuss is the mound builder myth. This is the idea that was promoted throughout the 18th and 19th century that the archaeological evidence of large towns and mound complexes in eastern North America were not built by the ancestors of First Nations people, but by white people from Europe. In various versions of this model, you have Phoenicians, Celts, Atlanteans, lost tribes of Israel, essentially anybody but the ancestors of contemporary Native Americans. Despite the fact that this was disproven repeatedly, even in the 19th century itself, it continues to be a problem. And why does this matter? One of the ways you can look at this are the consequences of this kind of thinking. Andrew Jackson, who at the time was president of the U.S., used this idea as a justification for the Indian Removal Act, which resulted in unimaginable suffering and the destruction of countless native communities throughout the southeastern part of this country in the 1830s. He justified it by saying that these mounds and other archaeological evidences clearly could not have been the work of the ancestors of the First Nations peoples, and therefore had to be the evidence of a pre-existing white race that had been driven out or wiped out by, in his words, these savages, therefore justifying all kinds of genocide, repression, and marginalization. So these kinds of ideas do have an impact, do have political, social, economic ramifications. Here you can see a map of the Trail of Tears, as it's known, where several tribes of the southeastern part of the U.S., Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and others, were forcibly removed by an order of Andrew Jackson using the U.S. military to remove them west of the Mississippi into what was then Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma. This was done against an express ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States, Chief Justice Marshall at the time, and Andrew Jackson is famously quoted as having said that Justice Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it, and explicitly gone against a ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court to commit this act of near genocide and clear abrogation of the rights of these people. Here are just some representations and discussions of issues of the Trail of Tears, representations by contemporary artists. Quotes, here's one that states, "I fought through the war between the states," referring to the Civil War, "and have seen many men shot, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." And this is by a veteran of some incredibly brutal fighting. So, do our ideas about the past and who builds ancient mounds and pyramids matter? Is it just fun and games? No, it isn't. Why does this continue to matter? Well, a new version of the mound builder myth, the Solutrean model for the initial settlement of the Americas from Europe, again provides the same kind of justification for genocide, marginalization, and dispossession that the mound builder myth did in the 19th century. This idea has been widely praised and adopted by white supremacist groups in the United States, and the books and articles setting forth the idea are available for sale through neo-Nazi websites. to date, the Anglo-American scholars who published this new Solutrean model, shown top right there, have yet to qualify their statements or explicitly reject the approval of white supremacist groups for this idea. And not just the politics, but the archaeological argumentation behind it is incredibly weak. There's no genetic evidence, there's no linguistic evidence, and the alleged archaeological evidence that they put forth is entirely circumstantial. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether you're watching the History Channel or the Sci-Fi Channel these days, right? Is it Stargate, or is it the latest episode on TLC of some highly questionable line of argument? So speaking about television's highly problematic programming, one version discussed in the SPLC article that you guys read, America Unearthed, right? I was on for 3 years on H2, History Channel 2. And among other things, it promoted ideas of pre-Columbian arrival of Europeans in North America, which are highly discussed in publications and websites put out by current and former members of the Nazi Party of America. Many of these venues promote the idea of suppressed history, as if we were hiding something from the public. Trust me, we don't make enough money to hide archaeology from you, and it's hard enough to get money to do the archaeology in the first place. Guests on the show repeatedly expressed admiration for a variety of racist and white supremacist organizations, including those promoting the creation of slave empires. So I'm not sure that there's much to equivocate on that. On the right here you can see a book, an unauthorized commentary on that show, but written by Jason Colavito, who is an author who does a lot of debunking of these conspiracy theories and other models which definitely fit the bill as pseudoscience. Other examples that you can think about: In Search of Aliens, the Ancient Aliens series that is distressingly popular, but they all fall into this same bag of very, very questionable approaches that I would even hesitate to call pseudoscience, because there's not even that much science in them. It's mostly conspiracy theories that sound more like somebody's eccentric, inebriated uncle at Thanksgiving than they do actual research. And while much of the appeal for these theories has roots in that Jacksonian justification for manifest destiny, their current manifestations are closely intertwined with the venomous persecution complexes that motivate the modern far right. And that's a direct quote from Zeitchik's article on Close Encounters of a Racist Kind, and sums up, I think, a great deal of that, the essence of that piece. So in a direct connection, the Nazi Party in Germany in the mid-20th century were very much into archaeology. They dedicated a great deal of effort to this in search for their mythical Aryan race, and trying to find evidence for their more outlandish claims of historical supremacy and justification for their ridiculous and murderous ideology of supremacy. Here we have one of my favorite, still problematic, but one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, the Indiana Jones movie franchise. And despite its many failings on a bunch of levels where we could critique its representation of archaeology, its gender dynamics, all of that. There's a lot of things we can talk about that are problematic with regard to Indiana Jones. But one thing it does get right is that opposing fascism, racism, and oppression, and doing what is right and ethical, is the appropriate position for archaeology. Nazis, I hate these guys. Great line. Why does this continue to matter? Here's why this matters a lot. Whether in the past, present, or future, making the assertions of great achievements and attributing them either to the incorrect ancestral people or to aliens, both robs the real ancestors of remarkable achievements and makes either the false claimants or aliens greater by comparison. And here's where it is the crux of the matter. This contributes directly towards a lower opinion of some people and greater admiration of others. This can then lead to the manipulation of distrust of marginal peoples by a politically powerful group to achieve control and domination of nationalist politics. This has happened before. We must not idly allow it to happen again and again and again. So, do these kinds of arguments matter? Yes, they do. Do they contribute to the kinds of ideologies and thinking and attitudes and psychology that lead to the most horrific side of humanity? Yes, they can contribute to that. And if they can contribute to that, then they are not harmless. Author Ta-Nehisi Coates has a fantastic quote that sums up a lot of this. Racism is not merely a simplistic hatred. It is more often broad sympathy toward some and broader skepticism toward others. When you put it that way, someone does not have to be a Nazi. Someone does not have to be wearing a white hood and burning a cross someplace to be contributing to the kind of thinking, the kinds of social structures that lead to oppression, marginalization, and disenfranchisement of large segments of the human population. You don't have to have an armband or put an armband on somebody else to be part of the problem. And this is important. And the crux of Coates' message is the premise that race is the child of racism. This concept, this false concept, we've talked about it in other lectures. It's the child of racism, not the father. Race is not a biological reality, he says, but rather a social construct engineered to justify oppression in the pursuit of wealth and power. And because so many of these ancient aliens arguments are discussing ancient achievements by native North Americans, native South Americans, native Central Americans, native Africans, native Egyptians, South Asians, Polynesians. The one thing so many of them have in common is that they are societies of color. Despite all of the arguments about Stonehenge being an observatory or a place of the Druids or, a magical ley lines nexus, they don't generally try to turn Stonehenge into an alien construction, nor the Roman Colosseum, nor Notre Dame Cathedral. So that's something to keep in mind. One of the modern iterations of this comes through Eric von Daniken's work, Chariots of the Gods. The movie, the arena spectacle, the video game, theme parks and attractions, right? It's published in 1968. As of a few years ago, last time I checked, 63 million copies had been sold worldwide, translated into dozens of languages. This was sort of the renaissance point for these ancient aliens arguments. Recall that 500 years ago, because people generally were still in the geocentric mindset that the Earth was the center of everything. The notion of aliens from distant galaxies wasn't generally something that came up in most conversations. So when you're talking about these ancient aliens, you have to have a concept of aliens before you can have them be ancient. The lines of argument that are used in von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, he talks about pictorial representations as being evidence. We'll talk about that here in a second. Argues that human evolution involved extraterrestrial civilization. We're guinea pigs for some genetic engineering by extraterrestrials. And that many advanced ancient technologies must have an extraterrestrial origin because our ancestors wouldn't have been smart enough to come up with these on their own. So one example you have, he likes to show rock art, examples of ancient rock art. One on the left there is from Australia, one on the right's from Utah. And you can see the anthropomorphic figures. Here we could say that the one on the left must be wearing a space helmet because that's round. On the right there, clearly this must be a star, an extraterrestrial. See the antennae on the head. I'm trying to one of the Star Wars. Yeah, that's clearly a Twi'lek, like Hera from Star Wars Rebels, opening a wormhole or something. That must be what those concentric lines are. You can interpret this in so many different ways. It is interesting, however, that in so many of these instances, all the extraterrestrials are bipedal and have 2 arms and 2 legs and one head at the top, just like us. Odds of that being replicated, repeatedly in different solar systems, different planetary bodies is pretty remarkable. So here you have some works by the Spanish artist Pablo Picasso, and so if you saw these works of art, would you conclude that Picasso had encountered extraterrestrials? I mean, particularly a couple of the Demoiselles d'Avignon there on the left certainly don't look very, very human in that representation there. And his famous painting of Guernica here looks more like something out of Pokemon universe than this one. You can see why that's a problem to use pictorial representations as evidence for extraterrestrial contact. Here's another thing. Artistic representations and the ink blot hypothesis. Look at these here, particularly the 2 on the left and the 1 on the bottom right. What do you see in each of these? And it can actually tell you something about yourself and others what they see in the ink blots. Because it's a classic example of what psychologists call projection. Different people are going to see different things, but if I tell you that I see a particular thing in one of these ink blots, then you're going to be able to see it too. One of these is fake and not a real random ink blot. Can you tell which one? I hope so. And that kind of forgery also occurs in the alt or pseudo-archaeology world. Some of these purported Viking rune stones or other giant bodies that have been found throughout the 19th and early 20th century. Photographs have been manipulated. Actual hoaxes have been carried out. So that happens too. But even when you don't have a forgery happening, you can see there's still quite a bit of room for interpretation. One classic example, the Nazca lines, right? Shown several examples there on the top 4 panels of this slide. Some people said that they were runways for aliens. Firstly, interstellar spacecraft probably don't need runways like a Cessna 172 would. Secondly, tall mountains flanking the Nazca Valley provide perspective for, quote, seeing the patterns. You don't have to have an airplane to see them. Thirdly, the designs are made by means of the astounding use of, wait for it, shovels, scraping the dark rocks away from the lighter soil underneath. Is this clear evidence of alien technology? I doubt it. Finally, the lines that you see here, pretty well shown on the one on the top right and the second from the left in a map form there. The lines actually track, as has been recently discovered by archaeologists working in the region, track underground aquifers and rivers, which were used by the ancient people of the Nazca Valley to create vast interconnected subterranean irrigation systems called puquillos. You can see bottom left there several examples in one area where they're accessing this underground flow of water. And the lines that they're creating on the top of the ground are actually tracking these self-same drainage patterns. So they're more engineering plans, perhaps, than runways and space alien evidence. Very remarkable that the ancient people of Peru were able to figure out the geology and structure and hydrology of the situation enough to be able to mark this to help them plan their irrigation and know where to dig these deep spiral wells to access this. A remarkable achievement, but not one that we have to attribute to space aliens. And why is that? Occam's razor, right? William of Occam, a medieval philosopher. This is an idea that you can take from here and apply it to anything that you do. It doesn't matter what field you're in, from business to medicine to astronomy to archaeology to geology to art. All of these different things can benefit from the application of Occam's razor. And it's the idea, put one way, that more straightforward explanations are in general better. That is, if you have 2 possible theories that fit all available evidence, the best theory is the one with fewer moving parts, right? It is important to emphasize the part about fitting all available evidence. Sometimes the simplest explanation is very wrong because it fails to account for the evidence. In this case, Occam's razor does not apply. But if the explanations are both in agreement with the evidence, then Occam's razor tips the scale in favor of the simpler explanation, right? Bear in mind, too, that the word simple here is used in a very specific sense. The simpler explanation doesn't necessarily mean the one that's easier to explain, okay? Rather, it means the one with fewer moving parts, fewer variables in the equation, fewer types of abstract ideas, or fewer guesses, right? One of the most famous examples of a model that applies this is E equals mc squared. Energy equals matter times the constant squared. This is still one of the most fundamental equations in physics and is elegant to a fault, right? Also, check out this link here, science.howstuffworks.com, and it'll give you another description, another discussion of Occam's razor and how it actually gets applied in innovation and scientific experiments. So, ancient aliens and Occam's razor, right? Okay, if we're going to say that aliens built the pyramids, right? Just as a for instance. I'm not saying you say this, but it has been said. We've got two competing hypotheses here. Hypothesis A, that humans built the pyramids, and hypothesis B, aliens built the pyramids. Let's see what we have to know, what we have to assert, what we have to postulate in each of these instances. For hypothesis A, we must postulate that there are humans. Fairly safe. Humans frequently build massive tombs. Also safe. Here in Japan and China and India and just about everywhere else where you have large-scale state-level societies with hierarchies of power and inequality, you get big tombs. Okay, that's a pretty safe postulate as well. And the pyramids of Egypt are one example of this behavior. All right, pretty safe. Those are the only things that you would have to postulate. In other words, rather than just empirically observe for the time period and place in question, right? And geography, place in question. For hypothesis B, that aliens built the pyramids to be true, we would have to start with 1. There is alien life. This is a postulate, not an empirically determined fact as of yet. Maybe. This could be determined next week. But right now, as we're sitting here, it is a postulate. Another one, following that first one, is that some percentage of that alien life is sentient. Again, finding bacteria on Mars would be alien life, but it wouldn't give us this second postulate of sentient, thinking, self-aware alien life, right? Okay. Now, after that second one is true, so now we've got one postulate that is then dependent upon the first postulate. And now we've got a third one. That sentient alien life has the technology to get to Earth. But that's dependent upon the second, which is dependent upon the first. So now we've got a chain of postulates, all of which must be true. Okay. The fourth one. That technology has already had sufficient time to get to Earth. In other words, this sentient alien life with highly advanced technology is either close enough to us for it not to take them too long to get here, or the technology is fast enough to allow them to get here within the span of time that we've been humans here. Most of the galaxy is further away than 10,000 light years, even traveling at the speed of light. So, fourth postulate, dependent upon the third, dependent upon the second, dependent upon the first. Fifth one. They arrived here openly in the past, but have stopped doing so in the present. So in the past, they were building pyramids, kind of hard to hide from people. You know, they're doing stuff, and they did that openly in the past, but they've stopped doing this in the present. This is a postulate, right? 6, aliens are motivated to build pyramids. For whatever reason, aliens want to build pyramids. How do you know this? Know this. You don't. It's a postulate. Aliens left no unambiguous signs of their presence. They didn't. Where is the clear alien statue that's not just an ink blot situation? No scientists have discovered evidence for aliens. Right? Now this one, some people like to try to get around by saying that the evidence for it has been suppressed. But remember, that goes back to some of those other lines of thinking that we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. Trust me, it's not feasible or reasonable to suggest that the evidence exists and it's just somehow hidden from everybody. That's not a reasonable thing to assert. Scientists don't get paid enough. Finally, aliens covered their tracks by making the pyramids look like they were built by humans. Right? So now, all of these things that are not empirically demonstrable, they're not facts, that you can't point to actual evidence for these specific things, right? All of these have to be true for hypothesis B to be accepted over hypothesis A, right? So the first explanation has fewer moving parts, fewer postulates, as Aristotle would say, and in addition, each moving part is more straightforward. In the second explanation, you have a lot of different postulates, and each one seems to raise more questions than it answers. So which one is more likely to be true? The first one. Other examples include things like Pakal's sarcophagus lid, Lord Pakal's sarcophagus lid from the site of Palenque in Chiapas, Mexico, where it's asserted that he's in a spacecraft, a rocket ship launching from the surface and going into space. Part of the misconception here involves people looking at things and having no appreciation for what is being represented. This is the Maya tree of life. He's entering the water, which is a metaphor for death among the Maya. This need not be interpreted as a spaceship. But if you can think about the significant cultural symbols or religious symbols or meaningful artwork in your own life, and then take it and transport it, 1,000 years into the future, and show it to somebody who has no idea about your language or tradition or belief structure, and see if they would, potentially interpret that as evidence for space aliens. You can see how that might be highly problematic. The reading that you've been assigned, Holly 2015, one of the works that he discusses in there is Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, which asserts an extraordinarily advanced civilization before the end of the last ice age. According to Graham Hancock, they were treated as gods by the primitive people they encountered, and provided a catalyst for the foundation of civilization in places like Egypt and Peru. He suggests somehow that within the last 10,000 years, crustal displacement, in his words, whatever that means, moved Antarctica from the temperate zone to the South Pole. That I haven't heard geology gotten that incorrectly since I read Journey to the Center of the Earth to my 10-year-old. According to Graham Hancock, this civilization was white. Yep, he means what it sounds like. For example, he denigrates the Maya, asserting that other than their calendar, quote, there was precious little else that these jungle-dwelling Indians did which suggested they might have had the capacity or the need to conceive of really long periods of time. And so clearly it must have been the advanced, ancient, Ice Age white civilization that taught them how to count and track the stars and the planets. Again, classic example of the kind of thinking we've been discussing for most of this lecture. Problems? Many. Geology? Anyone? Somebody who's listening to this must have a basic understanding of geology and explain to people why you can't move Antarctica from the temperate zone to the South Pole just on its own. It would be like trying to take a piece out of a Rubik's Cube and move it from one spot to the other without moving the other pieces. And see why that's a trouble. Um, it's completely haphazard and highly selective in its use of what it calls evidence. It ignores developmental sequences for all of these different situations, all these different civilizations and geographic regions, and of course, the whole racist thing. So, thumbs down. Hawley also discusses Coppen's The Ancient Alien Question, which is interesting because, to his credit at least, Coppen explicitly outs himself and urges the rejection of professional archaeology and modern science. According to Coppen, there is an extra-dimensional influenced elite conspiracy to enslave humanity. And according to him, the Terra Preta in the Amazonian basin is alien terraforming rather than sustainable agriculture. You read about that in your text book. It's not alien terraforming. It's, again, a remarkable achievement of indigenous people to solving a problem of the world around them. And if we can learn how they manage this, we may be able to develop more sustainable agriculture in tropical regions around the world. And that would be an incredible contribution to humanity. But it's not alien terraforming. Coppen gets so many things wrong. For example, he refers to the central Mexican archaeological site of Teotihuacan as a Maya city. Not a Maya city. This is, an empirically demonstrable thing that he just flat out gets wrong. He also claims that certain monuments in Peru were made from stone that was, quote, unworkable with human tools. The stone he's referring to has a hardness of 5.5 on Mohs scale, the same hardness as tooth enamel. Last I checked, that was workable with human tools. Here's Mohs scale here, so it's somewhere between apatite and orthoclase. You can scratch it with a knife, so that qualifies as workable with human tools. In most scientifically minded people's opinion. Finally, I'll close with this. A quote from Robert Cargill from the University of Iowa. There is an underlying ethnic bias against people of color that many white people don't even recognize when the magnificent achievements of the ancient world are attributed to aliens instead of to their rightful creators, the ancestors of modern Egyptians, Iraqis, Guatemalans, Zimbabweans, Peruvians, Native Americans, etc. This is not to say that belief in ancient alien theory makes one racist. However, attributing the achievements of the ancestors of darker-skinned peoples to aliens because you believe they couldn't have possibly done it themselves might be perceived as racist to the people of color who descend from these ancient innovators. And because the larger society around us, our research, our art, our writing, our speaking, does not happen in a social vacuum. And so perpetuating these models, giving them credit, giving them power, in and of itself contributes to those kinds of reprehensible ways of thinking about human history and humanity as a whole. We have to do everything we can in our power to give people respect, treat people and their history with dignity, and to empower people to determine their own destinies. And this is an important step, and we're at an important juncture with the information that travels around the world at the speed of light nearly now. We can shape the way people approach other people and the way we discuss the past, as I started with this in this lecture. The way we discuss the past definitely affects the present of many, many people. I'll close by saying this. There are still so many fantastic things to learn about the history of our species, both here in North America and around the world. There are so many stories yet to be told, so many genuine mysteries yet to uncover. We are just beginning this self-discovery. And if we can do it the right way, it will enhance our belonging together as a common human species, and hopefully bring us closer together. Thank you for your patience and listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.